Some names echo through history not as whispers, but as screams. The name Darth Malak belongs to that rare category of Sith Lords, whose legacy was forged not in the calculated manipulation of politics, but in the raw, unrestrained brutality of absolute conquest. Before he became the metal-jawed Dark Lord who would reduce worlds to ash, before his voice resonated with the cold, mechanical tone of a vocabulator, he was simply Alec, a boy from a forgotten village on a forgotten world whose destiny would be shaped by violence, friendship, and the seductive promise of power. The year was 3,964 years before the Battle of Yavin. The galaxy was younger then, though no less troubled. The Galactic Republic stretched across countless systems, maintained by the wisdom of the Jedi Order and the rule of law. But on the fringes, in the Outer Rim territories where Republic authority grew thin and local government struggled to maintain order, darkness was gathering. The Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders, warriors clad in distinctive armor and bound by a code of honor through combat, were beginning their expansion. World after world fell before their military might, and the Republic seemed paralyzed, unable or unwilling to respond with the force necessary to halt the invasion. On the remote planet of Quelli, life continued as it had for generations. This was a world of simple communities, human settlers who had made their homes in scattered villages across the temperate landscape. These were not grand cities with towering spires reaching toward the stars. These were farming communities, places where neighbors knew each other's names, where the rhythm of life followed the seasons, where children grew up expecting to follow in their parents' footsteps. One such village bore the lengthy name of Squinquagesimus, a designation that spoke to the methodical way these settlers had named their communities, perhaps numbering them in sequence as they spread across the planet's surface. In this village called Squinquagesimus, a child was born who would carry that name as his surname, as was the custom among the people of Quelli. They called him Alec. The boy who would become Darth Malak came into a world that seemed secure, or at least predictable. His early years would have been filled with the ordinary experiences of childhood in such a place. The sound of voices calling across dusty streets, the smell of meals cooking in family homes, the sight of the local sun setting over familiar horizons. These memories, if he retained them at all in later years, would have been touched with the golden haze of innocence. That brief window before the universe reveals its capacity for sudden, devastating change. We know frustratingly little about Alec's parents, his siblings if he had any, or the specific circumstances of his early life. The historical records that survived the chaos to come were incomplete, focused more on the warrior and Sith Lord he would become than on the child he once was. But we can reconstruct certain truths from what we know of Quelli and its people. This was a community that valued stability, that had carved out a peaceful existence on the edges of civilized space. The people here would have taught their children the basic skills of their trades, would have instilled in them the values that allowed such communities to function. Hard work, honesty, loyalty to family and neighbors, the quiet virtues that make civilization possible. What we do know with certainty is that Alec possessed something that set him apart from his peers, though at such a young age it may have manifested in ways too subtle to be immediately recognized. He was Force-sensitive. Within his cells existed a higher concentration of midi-chlorians than the average being, microscopic life forms that allowed certain individuals to connect with and manipulate the Force, that mysterious energy field that bound all living things together. In a child, especially one not yet trained to recognize and channel these abilities, Force sensitivity might appear as unusually quick reflexes, as moments of inexplicable intuition, as dreams that seem to predict future events, or simply as a certain intensity of presence that made others take notice. But before the Jedi Order could discover this remarkable child, before recruiters could arrive to offer him a place at one of their temples, before his potential could be properly evaluated and nurtured, the Mandalorians came to Quelli. The attack would have come without warning. The Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders, under the leadership of Mandalore the Ultimate, were not interested in negotiation or gradual conquest. Their philosophy was built around the concept of proving oneself through combat, of earning glory through victory over worthy opponents. But Quelli was not a military installation. It was not defended by armies or protected by planetary shields. It was simply a collection of farming communities, utterly unprepared for the fury that descended from the sky. Imagine the scene as it must have unfolded. Perhaps it began with the sound of ships breaking through the atmosphere, a roar that would have drawn every eye skyward. The sight of Mandalorian vessels, sleek and predatory, descending toward the surface would have triggered panic in hearts that had never expected to see war come to their doorstep. The Mandalorians deployed with practiced efficiency, warriors in distinctive armor hitting the ground and moving with the coordination of an elite military force. Their objective was not occupation, but destruction, not conquest, but devastation. They sought to break the spirit of potential resistance, to send a message that would echo across neighboring systems. The village of Squinquargesimus would have burned, homes that families had built with their own hands, structures that represented years of labor and hope, reduced to blackened frameworks and ash. The streets where Alec had played as a child, where he had run and laughed and lived the innocent life of youth, became killing grounds. The Mandalorians were not cruel for cruelty's sake, but they were utterly ruthless in pursuit of their goals. Resistance was met with overwhelming force. Those who could not fight were not spared through mercy, but through the simple calculus of military efficiency. The Mandalorians had other villages to destroy, other objectives to achieve. In the chaos and the fire, in the screaming and the smoke, Alec survived. How exactly he escaped the slaughter is not recorded in the histories that have come down to us. Perhaps his family sacrificed themselves to buy him time to flee. Perhaps his nascent Force abilities gave him the reflexes and intuition needed to avoid the worst of the violence. Perhaps it was simply the random chance that spares some while claiming others in the chaos of battle. But survive he did, and in surviving, he joined a stream of refugees fleeing the devastation, people carrying whatever they could salvage, heading away from the only homes they had ever known. The journey from Quelli to Republic space must have been harrowing. These were not people accustomed to space flight or galactic travel. They were farmers and craftspeople, suddenly thrust into the role of refugees, dependent on whatever transport could be secured, cramped into cargo holds or passenger compartments never designed for such desperate evacuations. The psychological impact of such displacement cannot be overstated. Everything familiar had been stripped away. Family members were dead or separated in the chaos. The future that had seemed so certain, the life that had seemed so stable, had been revealed as an illusion that could be shattered in a single afternoon of violence. When the refugees from Kweli arrived in Republic space, they encountered a bureaucracy that, while well-intentioned, was not designed to process the sudden influx of displaced persons from worlds that were fallen to Mandalorian aggression. Immigration officials did their best to catalog and assist the flood of refugees, but the task was overwhelming. In the case of Alec and others from Kweli, the officials noted that these people did not use family surnames in the traditional sense. In an attempt to maintain some form of record-keeping, the immigration authorities assigned the names of their home villages as surnames. Thus, Alec of the village of Squinquargesimus officially became Alec Squinquargesimus in the Republic's records. It was a name that would prove troublesome. Squinquargesimus was a mouthful difficult to pronounce for those not familiar with the naming conventions of Kweli. In the refugee centers and temporary housing where Alec found himself, trying to rebuild some semblance of a life from the ruins of his childhood, the name became a source of awkwardness. People stumbled over it, shortened it, avoided using it when possible. The boy who had lost everything, who carried the trauma of watching his world burn, now bore a name that marked him as other, as different, as someone who didn't quite fit into the streamlined efficiency of Republic society. But fate, or the Force, had plans for Alex Squinquargesimus that reached far beyond the challenges of refugee integration. Somewhere in the process of his settlement in Republic space, his Force sensitivity was finally detected. Perhaps a Jedi was present in one of the refugee processing centers, their own connection to the Force, allowing them to sense the potential in this traumatized child. Perhaps Alec's abilities manifested in a moment of stress, some small demonstration of power that could not be explained by normal means. However it occurred, the Jedi Order became aware of him, and representatives were dispatched to speak with those responsible for his care. The Jedi had maintained their practice of identifying and training Force-sensitive children for thousands of years. They believed, with the certainty born of long tradition, that such individuals needed proper guidance to safely develop their abilities. The Force was a powerful tool, but without training, without understanding, it could be dangerous both to the individual and to those around them. Force-sensitive children who grew up without guidance sometimes developed their abilities in twisted or unstable ways, becoming dangers to themselves and their communities. The Jedi saw it as their responsibility, their sacred duty, to find such children and offer them a place within the Order. For Alec, the offer must have come as both an opportunity and a further uprooting. He had barely begun to adjust to life as a refugee, barely started to process the loss of everything he had known, and now he was being offered a new life entirely, one that would take him even further from his origins. But what choice did he have, really? His family was gone, lost in the Mandalorian assault. His home world was devastated. The village where he had been born existed now only in memory and ash. The Jedi offered training, purpose, a place to belong in a galaxy that had shown him its capacity for sudden violence. Whether he fully understood what he was accepting Whether he grasped the magnitude of the commitment he was making, Alec agreed to join the Jedi Order. The Jedi Enclave on Dantooine became his new home. This agricultural world, with its rolling grasslands and scattered settlements, was far removed from the military front lines where the Mandalorian threat continued to grow. The Enclave itself was a place of learning and contemplation, a compound where Jedi trained away from the bustle and politics of more central worlds. Here, surrounded by the green landscapes of Dantooine, beneath the shadow of the Enclave's distinctive architecture, Alec began his transformation from traumatized refugee to Jedi Padawan. The training of a Jedi began with the basics. Younglings, as the youngest students were called, learned to meditate, to feel the Force flowing through and around them, to understand that they were part of something vast and interconnected. They studied the Jedi Code, those deceptively simple statements that would guide their entire lives. There is no emotion, there is peace. There is no ignorance, there is knowledge. There is no passion, there is serenity. There is no chaos, there is harmony. There is no death, there is the Force. These were not merely words to be memorized, but principles to be internalized, philosophies that would shape how a Jedi understood themselves and their role in the galaxy. For Alec, this philosophical training must have been particularly challenging. The Jedi preached detachment, the release of emotional attachment as a path to peace. But how does a child release the memories of his home burning, of his family dying, of everything familiar being torn away? The Jedi taught that anger and fear were paths to the dark side, that such emotions must be acknowledged and released rather than acted upon. But Alec had every reason to be angry, every justification for fear. The Mandalorians had destroyed his world, and they were continuing their conquest across the Outer Rim. The Jedi Council, for reasons that must have seemed incomprehensible to a child who had survived such devastation, had decided not to intervene militarily in the Mandalorian Wars. This decision by the Jedi Council was rooted in their understanding of the Force and their role as its servants. They believed that the living Force was showing them that the Mandalorian threat was not the true danger, that something larger and more sinister lurked behind the obvious conflict. They counseled patience, meditation, and trust in the Force to reveal the proper path. To the Council, immediate military action might make the ultimate threat, whatever it was, harder to perceive and counter. They were playing a long game, thinking in terms of centuries and the greater good of the galaxy. But to a young Padawan from Quayle, to a boy who had watched his world burn, the Council's restraint must have seemed like abandonment. While they meditated and debated, worlds were falling, people were dying, the Mandalorians were growing stronger with each conquest. Where was the justice in standing aside? Where was the wisdom in allowing such suffering to continue? These questions, which Alec must have wrestled with in the quiet hours of meditation, would plant seeds that would later grow into full-blown rebellion against the Council's authority. Despite these internal conflicts, Alec proved to be a talented student. His Force abilities developed rapidly under proper instruction. He demonstrated particular aptitude in the physical aspects of Jedi training, showing the reflexes and combat instincts that marked him as a natural guardian. The Jedi Order had different paths for students depending on their inclinations and strengths. Counselors focused on diplomatic solutions and deep understanding of the Force. Sentinels balanced multiple skills, often serving as investigators or specialists. Guardians, the path that called to Alak, were warriors. They excelled in lightsaber combat and used the Force primarily to enhance their physical abilities in battle. This specialization suited Alak perfectly, perhaps too perfectly. He threw himself into combat training with an intensity that his instructors noted with a mix of approval and concern. His lightsaber technique improved rapidly. His reflexes, already enhanced by the Force, became honed through countless hours of practice. He studied the 7 traditional forms of lightsaber combat, learning the strengths and weaknesses of each, developing his own personal style that emphasized aggressive offense and overwhelming power. In practice, duels with other students, Alak consistently proved himself formidable. But it was his personality, as much as his skills, that left an impression on those who trained alongside him. The traumatized refugee from Quayle had become a young man of fierce determination and unwavering loyalty to those he considered friends. He was quick to defend others, sometimes too quick, responding to perceived threats with an intensity that suggested the wounds of his childhood had never fully healed. He formed deep bonds with a select few, and for those friends, there was nothing he would not do. But he also showed a tendency toward recklessness, a willingness to charge into danger that, while admirable in some contexts, worried his instructors who had seen too many promising Jedi die young because they mistook courage for wisdom. It was during these years at the Dantooine Enclave that Alak acquired the nickname that would follow him for the rest of his time as a Jedi. His surname, Squinkwargesimus, remained as difficult to pronounce as ever. His fellow Padawans struggled with it, stumbled over it, and eventually, in the way that young people will, shortened it to something more manageable. They called him Squint. The nickname may have started as simple practicality, a way to avoid the linguistic gymnastics of his full surname, but it stuck for other reasons as well. Alak had developed a habit of narrowing his eyes when concentrating, giving him an intense, focused gaze that some found intimidating. That steely look, that ability to focus his entire attention on a target, seemed perfectly captured by the nickname. He was Squint, and in time, even he began to answer to it without reservation. Among the Padawans training at Dantooine, one friendship stood out above all others. Alak formed a close bond with another young Jedi, a student who would later be known throughout the galaxy simply as Revan. This other Padawan was recognized even among the talented students of the Enclave as exceptional. Revan possessed not only strong Force abilities, but also a brilliant tactical mind, a charisma that drew others naturally to follow, and a willingness to question everything. Where other students accepted the teachings of the Council without reservation, Revan constantly asked why, pushed for deeper understanding, challenged assumptions. This intellectual curiosity extended to exploring aspects of the Force that more traditional Jedi avoided, including careful study of the dark side, not to embrace it, but to understand it, and thereby better resist its call. The friendship between Alak and Revan was one of those rare connections that shapes both individuals involved. They were different in many ways. Revan was the strategist, the thinker, the one who planned 3 moves ahead. Alak was more direct, more action-oriented, preferring to solve problems through application of overwhelming force rather than subtle manipulation. But these differences complemented each other. Revan's plans were made more effective by Alek's willingness to execute them without hesitation. Alek's impulsiveness was tempered by Revan's strategic thinking. They learned from each other, challenged each other, and formed a bond that went beyond simple friendship into something closer to brotherhood. As they progressed through their training, both Alek and Revan began to develop reputations that extended beyond the Dantooine enclave. They were recognized as among the most promising Jedi of their generation, students who would likely become powerful knights, and perhaps, someday, respected masters. Their instructors noted their potential while also expressing concerns about their tendency to push boundaries, to question established protocols, to act independently when they believed the situation demanded it. These were not the traits of students who would contentedly follow the Council's lead without question, and that worried some of the more traditional masters. Both Alek and Revan eventually achieved the rank of Jedi Knight, a milestone that represented years of training and the successful completion of the trials that tested a Padawan's readiness for greater responsibility. Around 3,964 years before the Battle of Yavin, they stood as full members of the Jedi Order, no longer students, but knights, with the authority and responsibility that came with that rank. They were still young, still eager to prove themselves, still convinced that they understood the galaxy's problems and possessed the will and ability to solve them. And then the Mandalorian Wars, which had been a slowly building crisis on the edges of Republic space, exploded into a full-scale catastrophe. Mandalore the Ultimate, the leader of the Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders, launched a coordinated assault on Republic space that caught the government and military completely unprepared. World after world fell with shocking speed. The Mandalorians were not simply conquering territory, they were breaking the Republic's will to resist, demonstrating that the seemingly invincible government that had maintained peace for centuries could be challenged, could be beaten, could be humiliated by a relatively small force of warriors who believed in the glory of combat above all else. The Jedi Council maintained its position of non-intervention. They continued to insist that patience and meditation would reveal the true threat, that rushing to military action would be a mistake. They ordered the Jedi to continue their traditional roles of peacekeeping and diplomacy, but specifically forbade any organized military response to the Mandalorian aggression. To the Council, this was wisdom born of millennia of experience. They were following the will of the Force, even if that will was not immediately apparent to others. To Alek and Revan, the Council's inaction was unconscionable. They watched as the Mandalorians repeated on world after world what had been done to Quayle. Innocent people were dying, communities were being destroyed. The Republic military, fighting without Jedi support, was being systematically defeated. How could the Jedi, who were supposed to be guardians of peace and justice, stand aside while this happened? How could they meditate while the galaxy burned? The debate within the Jedi Order grew heated. Some, particularly among the younger knights, agreed with Revan and Alek that action was necessary. Others sided with the Council, trusting in their wisdom and experience. The division threatened to tear the Order apart, But the Council remained firm. They would not sanction military intervention. Any Jedi who chose to ignore this directive would be acting against the will of the Council, and by extension, against the Order itself. Revan, with his characteristic boldness, decided that if the Council would not lead, then he would. He began quietly recruiting like-minded Jedi, Knights, and Padawans who believed that the Mandalorian threat demanded an immediate response. He framed his position carefully, arguing that the Jedi Code called them to defend the innocent, that standing aside while people suffered was itself a form of action, a choice to allow evil to flourish unchallenged. His charisma and reputation made him an effective recruiter. Jedi who had been uncertain, who had been troubled by the Council's inaction but afraid to openly defy it, found in Revan a leader who would give voice to their doubts and direction to their desire to act. Alec was the first to join Revan's cause. This should surprise no one who understood their friendship and Alec's personal history. The Mandalorians had destroyed his home, killed his family, made him a refugee. Now they were doing the same to countless other worlds, creating more traumatized children, more grieving families, more shattered communities. The Council's arguments about patience and hidden threats rang hollow to someone who had personally experienced Mandalorian brutality. When Revan called for Jedi to join him in defending the Republic, Alec did not hesitate. He packed his belongings, gathered his lightsaber and what little personal equipment Jedi were permitted, and committed himself fully to what would become known as the revanchist movement. The term revanchist came from a word meaning those who seek revenge or the restoration of lost territory. It was partially a term of derision used by those who opposed them, suggesting that Revan and his followers were driven by anger rather than justice. But the revanchists embraced the term, arguing that there was nothing shameful in seeking to restore what had been lost, in fighting to reclaim worlds that the Mandalorians had stolen. They were not operating out of dark side corruption, they insisted, but out of a different interpretation of what the Jedi Code demanded. As more Jedi joined the revanchist movement, the Council found itself in an impossible position. These were not dark Jedi. These were knights who sincerely believed they were following the light, who were willing to risk their lives for others. But they were also openly defying Council authority, creating a schism within the Order that threatened its unity. The Council could not simply accept this rebellion, but neither could they bring themselves to expel or imprison Jedi who were by any reasonable measure trying to do good. Alec threw himself into the revanchist cause with the same intensity he had brought to his combat training. He traveled to Jedi enclaves across Republic space, speaking with Knights and Padawans, making the case for intervention, countering the Council's arguments with passion and conviction. He had lived through Mandalorian aggression. He could speak with authority about what their conquest meant. When he described the burning of Quayle, when he talked about watching his world die while the Jedi debated philosophy, he converted many who had been sitting on the fence. It was during one of these recruitment missions that Alec had an encounter that would prove significant to his personal journey. On the Ecumenopolis of Terrace, a world dominated by a single planet-wide city divided into strict economic levels, Alec visited the Jedi Temple, hoping to find supporters for the revanchist cause. There, he met a Padawan named Zane Carrick, a young human who was widely considered to be the worst student at the Taris Academy. Zane was clumsy, accident-prone, and seemed utterly unsuited for the life of a Jedi. But Alec saw something in him, some quality that others had missed. They spoke about the Mandalorian threat. Zane, despite his reputation as a poor student, surprised Alec with his insight. The Padawan agreed that something needed to be done, but he suggested that the Mandalorians might not be the real enemy, that perhaps the Sith were somehow involved. Alec dismissed this concern. The Sith were ancient history, defeated and destroyed centuries ago. The threat was here and now, wearing Mandalorian armor and wielding Mandalorian weapons. But he admired Zane's willingness to think independently, to question assumptions, and he told the young Padawan that he had a role to play, even if he didn't yet understand what it might be. Their paths would cross again, under circumstances neither could have predicted. Before leaving Taris, Alec encountered Lucian Dray, one of the Jedi Masters at the Taris Academy. Dry asked Alec to watch for his Padawan, Zane Carrick, who had apparently run off chasing a Snivian criminal named Marn Hiragriff. Alec agreed, and later that day, he found himself in a position to save Zane's life when the Padawan fell from a speeder bike into the lower levels of the city. It was a small moment, a brief intersection of their lives, but it established a connection that would become important. The revanchists, now numbering in the hundreds, departed Republic space and headed for the front lines of the Mandalorian Wars. They were not operating with official sanction, not acting as formal representatives of the Jedi Order, but as independent knights, choosing to answer what they saw as a moral imperative. Alec had found his purpose, or thought he had. He was finally doing something about the Mandalorian threat. He was finally fighting back against the warriors who had destroyed his childhood. Alongside his friend Revan and hundreds of other idealistic Jedi, he was going to save the Republic that the Council seemed content to watch fall. But war, as Alec was about to discover, was far more complicated than the clear moral certainty of training sabers and philosophical debates. The Mandalorians were not simple villains from a child's story. They were warriors with their own code of honor, their own culture, their own reasons for fighting. And war itself, the actual experience of combat, as opposed to the idealized version taught in academy sparring matches, would change everyone who participated in it. The revanchists arrived in the Outer Rim to find a desperate situation. The Republic military had been fighting a losing battle for years. Mandalorian forces had conquered dozens of systems, and their momentum seemed unstoppable. The arrival of hundreds of Jedi, led by tactical genius Revan and supported by fierce warriors like Alec, changed the balance of power immediately. Suddenly, the Republic forces had Force users on the front lines, Jedi who could anticipate attacks, who could turn the tide of battles through their connection to the Force, who could inspire soldiers who had begun to lose hope. Alec quickly gained a reputation on the battlefield. He was not subtle, not given to the elegant precision that characterized some Jedi combat styles. He was a force of nature, charging into the thick of fighting with his lightsaber blazing, cutting through Mandalorian warriors with devastating efficiency. His combat style was aggressive, overwhelming, built around the principle that the best defense was an offense so fierce that the enemy never had time to mount an effective counterattack. Soldiers who fought alongside him watched in awe as he carved through enemy lines, seeming to anticipate every attack, moving with a speed and precision that appeared superhuman because, in a sense, it was. But his fellow revanchists noticed something else about Alak's fighting style, something that concerned some of them. He fought with intensity that went beyond tactical necessity. When he faced Mandalorian warriors, there was a personal fury in his attacks, a barely controlled rage that suggested his motivations went deeper than abstract commitment to the Republic's defense. He was fighting the Mandalorians who had destroyed Quali, even if these were not the same individuals, even if they wore different clan markings. In every Mandalorian warrior, he saw destruction of his home, and he fought accordingly. Revan recognized this tendency in his friend and tried to channel it productively. He gave Alak command of assault units, positions where aggression was an asset rather than a liability, where Alak's willingness to charge directly into danger could be used to break enemy positions. Alak excelled in these roles, earning promotion to the rank of general, commanding not just Jedi, but also Republic military forces. The refugee from Quali, the boy who had fled his burning home, had become a war hero, a general whose tactical victories were celebrated across Republic space. But military success came at a cost. The war ground on month after month, year after year, the initial clarity of purpose that had driven the revanchists began to erode under the weight of accumulated horrors. Alak saw too much death, ordered too many attacks that sent soldiers to their deaths even when victory was assured, became too comfortable with the calculus of acceptable casualties. The Jedi Code's teachings about peace and serenity seemed increasingly irrelevant in the face of brutal military necessity. The Force, which the Jedi had taught was a tool for wisdom and understanding, became primarily a weapon, a means of killing enemies more efficiently. During a mission to the planet Surya, Alak experienced something that would haunt him for years. He and several other Jedi were ambushed by Mandalorian forces after a battle. They were captured and taken to Flashpoint Station, a Republic research facility that the Mandalorians had seized. There, Alak met Demagol, a Mandalorian scientist who was fascinated by the Jedi and their connection to the Force. Demagol was not a warrior. He was a researcher, and he viewed the captured Jedi as subjects for study. What followed was torture, though Demagol would have called it scientific investigation. He wanted to understand how the Force worked, how Jedi connected to it, whether it could be isolated or transferred. Alak found himself subjected to experiments designed to push him to his limits, to break down his mental defenses, to expose the mechanisms of his Force abilities. He used the Force to block the pain, to maintain his mental integrity, but the experience left scars that went deeper than physical wounds. When the revanchists finally rescued the captured Jedi from Flashpoint Station, Alak was changed. The torture had hardened something in him, had confirmed his belief that the Mandalorians were not simply warriors following an honorable code, but capable of genuine cruelty. Any lingering doubts about the righteousness of the war effort disappeared. The Mandalorians had to be stopped, whatever the cost. It was around this time that events on Taris came to a head. The group of Jedi Masters running the Taris Academy, who called themselves the Jedi Covenant, had been operating based on a prophecy that suggested a great Sith Lord would emerge and bring destruction to the galaxy. In their zealous attempt to prevent this prophecy, they had murdered their own Padawans, believing that one of them was destined to fall to the dark side. They framed Zane Carrick for the murders, forcing him to flee. The revelation of the Covenant's actions threatened to create a massive scandal within the Jedi Order. Alec became involved in helping Zane expose the Covenant and clear his name. During this period, he made a decision that reflected both his growing independence from traditional Jedi authority and the personal transformation he had undergone. The Jedi Council had issued an arrest warrant for those helping Zane, seeing them as harboring a fugitive. Alec chose to openly defy this order, and in doing so, he took a name that would distinguish him from his past. He abandoned the surname that had marked him as a refugee from a destroyed world and adopted a new identity. He was no longer Alex Quinquagesimus. From this point forward, he would be known simply as Malak. The name change was deeply symbolic. Malak was not just a shortened version of his previous name, though it drew from those letters. It represented a conscious choice to define himself on his own terms, to leave behind the identity that others had given him and claim one that he chose for himself. When he explained the change to friends like the Arcanian woman Jarael and the Snivian Marn Hieroglyph, he told them that Malak was what he felt he had been born to be. After the Mandalorians destroyed Quelly, he had answered to names that others gave him because he hadn't cared who he was. His home was gone, so it didn't matter. But now he understood that his identity did matter, that there was nobody left who remembered him as Alec, that the name he carried forward would be the one he chose. The decision revealed something important about Malak's psychological state. He was actively constructing a new self, leaving behind the traumatized refugee and the conflicted Jedi Padawan, becoming the warrior and leader he believed the galaxy needed. This kind of deliberate self-reinvention can be empowering, allowing someone to move beyond their trauma and chart their own course. But it can also be dangerous, particularly for someone whose connection to the Force made their emotional states so impactful. By consciously rejecting his past, Malak was cutting ties to the anchors that might have kept him grounded as the war pushed him toward increasingly dark choices. During the campaign to help Zane Carrick, Malak had an experience that profoundly affected his understanding of the Mandalorians. He witnessed a vision, either through the Force or through some ancient recording device, of the Mandalorian genocide of the Cathar people. The Cathar were a feline humanoid species known for their loyalty and honor. When the Mandalorians attacked their worlds, the Cathar fought back with desperate courage, trying to defend their families and communities. The Mandalorians, under the command of Cassis Fett, Mandalore's lieutenant, herded captured Cathar to the beaches and oceans of their own world and systematically slaughtered them. The vision showed hundreds of Cathar streaming toward the water, pursued by Mandalorian warriors. Jedi attempted to intervene, but found their lightsabers passing harmlessly through the phantom Mandalorians. They could only watch in horror as the Cathar were driven into the water and killed. The whole scene was orchestrated not out of military necessity, but as a deliberate act of genocide, designed to break the spirit of any species that might resist Mandalorian conquest. For Malak, witnessing this atrocity confirmed his darkest views of the enemy. The Mandalorians were not just warriors following a code. They were capable of systematic ethnic cleansing, of deliberately targeting civilians, of crimes that went far beyond the unfortunate but expected casualties of warfare. After seeing the Cathar genocide, Malak came to believe that all Mandalorians were incapable of genuine honor or friendship, that their warrior culture was fundamentally corrupt, that they needed to be not just defeated, but destroyed as a fighting force. This absolutist thinking, this inability to distinguish between individual Mandalorians and the collective actions of their people, marked a significant step in Malak's descent. The Jedi taught that individuals had to be judged on their own merits, that even enemies could potentially be redeemed, that hatred was a path to the dark side. But Malak's experiences, from the burning of Quayle to the torture at Flashpoint Station to the vision of Cathar genocide, had convinced him that some enemies were beyond redemption, that sometimes the only moral response was complete destruction. As the Mandalorian Wars progressed, Revan's tactical genius began to turn the tide. He understood the Mandalorian way of thinking, their cultural imperatives, their military tactics. He knew that they respected strength above all else, that they believed in the glory of worthy combat. He used this understanding against them, setting traps that played to their aggressive nature, choosing battlefields that gave Republic forces every advantage, slowly grinding down the Mandalorian war machine, even as he built up his own forces and reputation. Malak remained Revan's most trusted lieutenant throughout this period. He led assault after assault, breaking Mandalorian positions through sheer audacity and overwhelming force. Soldiers who served under Malak spoke of his fearlessness, his apparent invincibility in combat, the way he seemed to anticipate enemy movements before they happened. They didn't understand that he was using the Force to predict attacks, to enhance his reflexes, to push his body beyond normal human limitations. To them, he simply seemed like a force of nature, an unstoppable warrior who would charge into situations that should have been suicide and emerge victorious. But those close to Malak could see the toll the war was taking. The young Jedi who had been nicknamed Squint at Dantooine, who had laughed with friends and debated philosophy, was being consumed by the warrior general. He rarely smiled anymore. He spent his time between battles studying Mandalorian tactics, planning the next assault, thinking about how to kill the enemy more efficiently. The meditative practices that were supposed to center a Jedi and maintain their connection to the light side of the Force became perfunctory at best. Malak was drawn on the Force constantly, using it as a weapon, but he had lost the quiet reflection that allowed a Jedi to truly understand what the Force was showing them. Revan noticed these changes in his friend and tried to address them, but Malak dismissed the concerns. They were winning, he argued. Every battle brought them closer to defeating the Mandalorians, to ending the threat, to saving countless lives. The philosophical niceties of proper Jedi practice seemed like a luxury they could not afford while the war continued. There would be time for reflection and meditation after the victory. For now, they needed to focus on achieving that victory by any means necessary. This phrase, by any means necessary, became increasingly common in revanchist planning sessions. Revan used it in tactical briefings. Malak repeated it when subordinates questioned orders that seemed unnecessarily brutal. It was a subtle corruption, a slow erosion of the moral boundaries that the Jedi Code was supposed to maintain. Small compromises led to larger ones. Actions that would have been unthinkable at the start of the war became routine. The revanchists convinced themselves that they were still following the light, that their intentions remained pure, that the ends of saving the Republic justified increasingly questionable means. The war came to its climax at the planet Malachor V in 3,960 years before the Battle of Yavin. This world, located in the Outer Rim, had deep connections to the dark side of the Force. Ancient Sith had used Malachor V as a stronghold thousands of years before, and their presence had left a permanent stain on the planet's connection to the Force. The very atmosphere of Malachor seemed a whisper of dark secrets and hidden power. It was, in retrospect, an incredibly dangerous place to stage the final battle of the war, but neither Revan nor Malak fully appreciated the risk at the time. Revan had developed a new weapon, a superweapon that had been constructed in utmost secrecy. The mass shadow generator was the creation of Bao-Dur, a Zabrak technician who had studied the unique gravitational properties of Malachor V. The device was designed to weaponize the planet's gravity, to create a gravitational anomaly so powerful that it would pull everything in orbit down to the surface, crushing ships and troops alike. It was a weapon of terrible destructive power, something that went far beyond conventional military technology into the realm of apocalyptic destruction. Revan had kept the mass shadow generator secret from most of his forces, shared its existence only with a select few. One of those few was Mitra Surik, a Jedi general who had served with distinction throughout the war and whom Revan trusted implicitly. She was given command of half the Republic fleet and given specific instructions. She was to lure the Mandalorians into position, to draw them into the trap, and then, at the critical moment, she was to activate the weapon. The actual plan was more complex than simple deployment of a superweapon. Revan had challenged Mandalore the Ultimate to single combat, knowing that the Mandalorian leader could not refuse such a challenge without appearing weak. The duel between Revan and Mandalore would take place aboard Mandalore's flagship, drawing the Mandalorian forces into a defensive position around their leader's vessel. Meanwhile, Surik's fleet would engage the bulk of the Mandalorian forces, pulling them closer to Malachor V itself. The mass shadow generator would then be activated, destroying everything within range. It was a plan that demonstrated Revan's tactical brilliance and his increasing willingness to sacrifice his own people for victory. The Republic forces under Surik's command, the Jedi who had followed the revanchists into war, would be in the weapons area of effect. They would die alongside the Mandalorians. But Revan had calculated that the sacrifice was acceptable, that ending the war here and now by destroying the Mandalorian fleet entirely was worth the cost in Republic and Jedi lives. Malak commanded forces supporting Revan's direct assault on Mandalore's flagship. He carved through Mandalorian defenders, leading squads of Republic soldiers deeper into the massive warship. The fighting was brutal, close quarters combat in the corridors and chambers of a vessel under fire. Malak excelled in this environment, his aggressive style perfectly suited to the chaos of ship-to-ship boarding action. He lost track of the larger battle in the intensity of immediate combat, focused entirely on reaching the command deck where Revan was dueling Mandalore. The duel between Revan and Mandalore the Ultimate was exactly that, ultimate. Two supreme warriors, each representing their people's best hope for victory, fighting with everything they had. Mandalore was a formidable opponent, a warrior who had conquered system after system, who had never known defeat. But Revan was something else entirely, a Jedi who had studied every combat form, who could predict his opponent's moves through the Force, who fought with a combination of technical skill and tactical brilliance that Mandalore could not match. Revan killed Mandalore in single combat. The Mandalorian leader, mortally wounded, used his last moments to speak to his killer. He revealed something that would change Revan's understandings of the entire war. The Mandalorians had not acted alone. They had been manipulated, guided by Sith agents who had promised them glory and testing their strength against worthy opponents. Mandalore told Revan where to find evidence of this Sith involvement, pointed him toward the tomb of an ancient Sith Lord on the planet Rekiad. While Revan was receiving this revelation, Surik faced an impossible decision. The Mandalorian forces were in position. The trap was set. But the Republic forces under her command, many of them Jedi who had become her friends over years of fighting together, were also in the weapon's range. If she activated the mass shadow generator now, she would kill not just the enemy, but her own people. The plan had seemed abstract when Revan explained it. Now, looking at her fleet and knowing that her next action would doom thousands of Republic soldiers and scores of Jedi to death, the weight of the decision became agonizingly real. But she did it. With a simple nod to Bao-Dur, Surik gave the order. The mass shadow generator activated, and Malachor V's gravity went mad. Ships were pulled from orbit, crushed together, driven down toward the planet's surface with irresistible force. Mandalorian vessels crumbled like paper. Republic ships died alongside them. Jedi who had survived years of warfare, who had fought in dozens of battles, screamed as their ships were torn apart. The Force itself seemed to scream as thousands died in moments, their life energies severed suddenly and violently, creating a wound in the Force that would never fully heal. The planet Malachor V, already touched by dark-side corruption, was shattered by the weapon's activation. Its surface was transformed into a broken, twisted landscape of debris and wreckage. The lush world that had existed before became a graveyard, littered with the remains of ships and the bodies of the dead. The dark side energies already present on the planet fed on the sudden mass death, growing stronger, more malevolent. Malachor V became a wound in the Force, a place where the normal flow of energy was disrupted, where darkness pooled and festered. Malak, aboard Mandalore's flagship when the weapon activated, felt the disturbance in the Force. Every Jedi who survived the activation felt it, a sudden tearing sensation as thousands of Force users and Force-sensitive individuals died at once. The psychic backlash was overwhelming, a wave of death and pain that crashed over every Jedi's mental defenses. Many collapsed. Some severed their own connection to the Force in self-defense, unable to bear the agony of so many lives ending simultaneously. Mitra Surik, who was closest to the weapon and most connected to the act of its deployment, was nearly destroyed by the feedback. saving herself only by cutting herself off from the Force entirely. But Malak did not sever his connection. He rode out the wave of death, letting it wash over him, feeling every life extinguished, and in that moment of supreme horror, surrounded by death and destruction, drawn on the dark side energies that Malachor V had accumulated over millennia, Malak felt something change within himself. The war had already pushed him far from the idealistic young Jedi who had trained at Dantooine. But this moment, this participation in mass slaughter on an unprecedented scale, represented a fundamental transformation. The Mandalorian Wars ended with the activation of the mass shadow generator. The surviving Mandalorian forces, leaderless and broken, surrendered. Revan ordered them disarmed and scattered, forbidding them from organizing under a single banner again. He took Mandalore's mask, the symbol of their leadership, and hid it away so that no one could unite the clans. The Republic had won, but the victory tasted of ash and death. The revanchists returned to public space as heroes. They had done what the Jedi Council said could not be done. They had defeated the Mandalorians, ended the threat, saved countless systems from conquest. They were celebrated in the Senate, praised by grateful populations across the galaxy, held up as examples of courage and dedication. The Jedi Council, which had opposed their intervention, was forced to acknowledge the practical success, even as they questioned the methods and the toll the war had taken on those who fought it. But Revan and Malak did not return to the Jedi Order. They did not go back to Dantooine to meditate and reconnect with the light side of the Force. Instead, they took the third of the Republic fleet that had served directly under them and headed into the unknown regions, ostensibly to pursue the scattered remnants of the Mandalorian forces and ensure they could never threaten the Republic again. It seemed like a reasonable precaution to most observers. The Mandalorians had proven themselves dangerous. Better to be certain they were truly broken than to allow them to rebuild in secret. In reality, Revan and Malak were following the clue that Mandalore had given them. They went to Rekiad first, finding the tomb that Mandalore had described, discovering evidence of Sith involvement in the Mandalorian Wars. This revelation opened new questions. The Sith were supposed to be extinct, destroyed thousands of years ago in conflicts so ancient they had passed into legend. Yet, here was evidence of recent Sith activity, of manipulation and planning that suggested the Sith had survived somehow, somewhere, beyond the Republic's knowledge. The investigation led them deeper into the unknown regions, to places that did not appear on Republic star charts, to worlds that had been forgotten or deliberately hidden. And ultimately, after months of searching, they found what they were looking for. They discovered the hidden Sith Empire, rebuilt in secret after the Great Hyperspace War, maintained for over a millennium under the rule of the immortal Sith Emperor Vitiate, also known as Tenebrae. Revan and Malak approached this discovery with a combination of caution and arrogance. They were heroes of the Mandalorian Wars, powerful Jedi who had defeated what seemed like an impossible enemy. They had won where the Council said victory was impossible. Surely they could handle whatever threat these hidden Sith represented. They spent months infiltrating the Empire's capital on Droman Kos, posing as mercenaries, learning what they could about this strange society that worshipped the dark side and followed an emperor who had ruled for over 1,000 years. Eventually, they decided that the Sith Emperor needed to be eliminated, that his threat to the Republic was too great to ignore. They planned an assassination, arranging to meet with one of the Imperial guards who promised to sneak them into the Imperial Citadel. It seemed too easy, but their confidence was high. They had faced armies and won. One Sith Lord, even an ancient and powerful one, seemed like a manageable problem. They walked into a trap. The Imperial Guard they had been meeting with was bound to the Emperor's will, as all Imperial Guards were. Every meeting had been reported. Every word they spoke had been relayed. The Emperor had been watching them the entire time, amused by their audacity, fascinated by these Jedi who thought they could challenge him. When Revan and Malak finally stood before Vitiate in his throne room, when they ignited their lightsabers and prepared to strike, the Emperor simply smiled. What happened next broke them both. The Sith Emperor did not fight them physically. He did not need to. His power in the Force was so immense, so far beyond anything they had encountered, that physical combat was irrelevant. He reached into their minds with terrible force, overwhelming their mental defenses as easily as a tsunami overwhelms a sandcastle. He showed them darkness that made Malachor 5 seem like a candle shadow. He broke their wills, twisted their memories, rewrote their very sense of self. The Jedi Revan and Alec Squinquargesimus, now Malak, ceased to exist in that throne room. In their place stood Darth Revan and Darth Malak, Sith Lords bound to the Emperor's service, convinced that they had chosen the dark side of their own free will, unable to remember the moment when their choice had been stolen from them. The Emperor had created new servants, powerful dark Jedi, who would serve his grand plan to invade and conquer the Republic. The transformation was complete. Malak, who had started as a traumatized refugee, who had become an idealistic Jedi, who had evolved into a war hero willing to do whatever was necessary to protect the innocent, was now a Sith apprentice. The path that had begun with the burning of Quayle had led through violence and trauma and compromised choices to this moment of ultimate corruption. And the worst part was that Malak did not realize he had been corrupted. He believed he had seen the truth, that the dark side offered power that the Jedi had denied him, that he had finally cast off the chains of the Jedi Council's weak philosophy. The Emperor gave them a mission. They were to return to Republic space and find the Star Forge, an ancient Rakatan space station that could produce an infinite fleet. With such a weapon, the Sith Empire could overwhelm the Republic, preparing it for conquest. Revan and Malak, now servants of the dark, departed Dromund Kaas with this task burning in their minds. They would find the Star Forge, they would build an armada, and they would return to destroy everything they had once fought to protect. But they carried within them something the Emperor had not fully accounted for, the strength of will that had made them such powerful Jedi, that had allowed them to defy the Council and lead a war to victory, did not disappear simply because their memories had been tampered with. Deep within their minds, behind walls the Emperor had built, the light side still flickered, and eventually that light would begin to reassert itself, twisting the Emperor's commands, changing their mission in subtle ways that Vitiate would not discover until it was too late. The journey into darkness was complete, but the story was far from over. Darth Malak had been born in that throne room on Dromund Kaos. What he would do with the terrible power he now commanded, how he would transform from servant to master, from apprentice to Dark Lord, remained to be written. The galaxy would come to know him not as the traumatized refugee or the heroic Jedi, but as one of the most brutal Sith Lords in recorded history. His reign of terror had only just begun. The galaxy that Darth Revan and Darth Malak returned to was unprepared for what they had become. The heroes of the Mandalorian Wars, the Jedi who had saved the Republic when the Council would not act, came back as something far darker. The Emperor Vitiate had sent them forth with clear instructions. Find the Star Forge, build an armada, prepare the galaxy for conquest. But the two Sith Lords who left Dromund Kaos were not entirely the puppets Vitiate believed he had created. Their minds were powerful, their wills stronger than he had accounted for, and deep within the corruption, seeds of resistance remained. Revan and Malak did not immediately return to Republic space. Their mission was specific. The Star Forge was an ancient Rakatan device, a space station that drew energy directly from a nearby star and used that power to manufacture warships and weapons at an unprecedented scale. Such a factory, left over from the long-dead Infinite Empire, would give whoever controlled it the ability to produce a fleet vast enough to overwhelm any military opposition. But the Star Forge's location had been lost for millennia. The Rakata themselves, once masters of the galaxy, had degenerated into primitive tribes with little memory of their ancestors' achievements. Finding the Star Forge required finding the star maps, ancient Rakatan navigation devices scattered across the galaxy. These maps did not show the Star Forge's location directly, but provided pieces of a puzzle that, when assembled, would reveal the coordinates. The Rakata had hidden these maps on worlds significant to their empire, places touched by their technology and their connection to the Force. Revan and Malak would need to visit each location, access each map, and gradually piece together the path to their ultimate goal. The search took them across the galaxy. They visited Dantooine, where one star map was hidden in the ruins of an ancient temple not far from the Jedi enclave where Malak had trained. Walking those grounds as a Sith Lord, seeing the place where he had learned to be a Jedi, must have created a strange cognitive dissonance. The memory walls that the Emperor had built in his mind prevented full recollection, but echoes remained. This place was familiar. He had been happy here once, though he could no longer remember why. The feeling was unsettling, quickly pushed aside in favor of focusing on the mission. They traveled to Kashyyyk, the Wookiee homeworld, where another star map lay hidden in the depths of the Shadowlands, the dangerous forest floor where even Wookiees rarely ventured. The journey through that dark jungle, fighting past native predators and ancient security systems, tested their abilities, but ultimately yielded the information they sought. Each map they activated added more data to the puzzle, bringing them closer to their goal. Tatooine, the desert world that seemed to have no significance but held Rakatan ruins beneath its sands, provided another piece. The hostile environment, the Sand People tribes that attacked anyone who ventured into the dune sea, the sheer desolation of the planet served as challenges that Revan and Malak overcame through their command of the Force. They were growing stronger in the dark side with each trial, each use of their power for domination and destruction rather than peace and defense. Manayan, the ocean world controlled by the neutral Selkath species who profited from their monopoly on the medical substance colto, presented different challenges. The Selkath maintained strict neutrality in galactic conflicts, and accessing the star map located in the depths of their oceans required navigating both natural dangers and political complexities. But Revan and Malak were adept at manipulation, and they secured access to the underwater facility that housed the ancient Rakatan technology. Korriban, the ancient Sith homeworld, was perhaps the most significant discovery. The star map there was located within a tomb, surrounded by the dark side presence that had accumulated over thousands of years of Sith occupation. This world was sacred to the Sith, a place where Dark Lords had ruled and conducted their terrible experiments with dark side alchemy and sorcery. For Malak, walking the surface of Korriban felt like coming home. The darkness that permeated every stone, every grain of sand, resonated with the darkness growing within him. The Emperor's corruption had taken deep root, and Korriban's ambient dark side energy fed it, helped it grow stronger. As they collected the star maps, Revan and Malak were changing in ways that went beyond simple alignment to the dark side. The Emperor had dominated their minds, twisted their memories, and turned them into instruments of his will. But their spirits fought back in the only way available to them, unable to remember that they had been enslaved, unable to consciously resist commands they believed were their own desires. They nevertheless began to subvert the Emperor's intentions. Vitiate had sent them to find the Star Forge so that it could be used by the Sith Empire to conquer the Republic. But as Revan and Malak drew closer to completing this mission, as the final pieces of the puzzle came together, they began to conceive of a different plan. They would find the Star Forge, yes. They would use it to build an armada, but they would not be delivering that armada to Droman Kos. They would use it themselves to build their own empire, to conquer the Republic not in Vitiate's name, but in their own. This was not conscious rebellion. They did not remember the Emperor's domination of their minds, did not realize they were breaking free from mental conditioning. They simply felt that the right course of action, the logical next step, was to claim the Star Forge for themselves. The idea felt natural, felt correct, felt like it had been their plan all along. The Emperor, isolated in his throne room on Droman Kos, would not learn of their betrayal until it was too late to prevent it. The final star map led them to Rakata Prime, also known as Lihon, a planet hidden in the unknown regions, protected by a planetary disruption field that disabled any ship's navigational systems that approached too closely. The planet's orbit was littered with the wreckage of vessels that had stumbled upon Lihon over the centuries, crashed to the surface by the ancient defenses that the Rakata had established to protect their greatest creation. The Star Forge itself hung in orbit, massive and terrible, drawing power directly from the system's sun, dormant but not dead, waiting for someone with knowledge of Rakatan technology and command of the Force to reactivate it. Landing on Lihon was a challenge in itself. The disruption field played havoc with their ship systems, forcing them to crash land on one of the planet's islands. They found themselves among the descendants of the ancient Rakata, the once mighty species now reduced to tribal societies that retained only fragments of their ancestors' knowledge. The Rakata had split into factions. The elders, who sought redemption for their species' dark past, wanted the Starforge destroyed, seeing it as a symbol of their ancestors' corruption and crimes. The Black Rakata, led by a warlord called the One, wanted to reclaim their heritage of conquest and power. Revan, with his tactical brilliance and ability to manipulate others, negotiated with both tribes. He convinced the elders that he shared their goal of destroying the Starforge, promising to eliminate the ancient weapon if they helped him access the Temple of the Ancients. This massive structure, built by the ancient Rakata at the height of their power, contained the codes and technology needed to access the Starforge and deactivate the planetary disruption field. The elders, desperate to see their people's greatest sin erased, agreed to help. Within the Temple of the Ancients, Revan and Malak discovered the full truth about the Starforge. It was not merely a factory for producing warships. It was a dark side nexus, a space station that fed on the Force itself, drawing not just energy from the nearby star, but also amplifying the dark side energies of those who used it. The ancient Rakata had built it to fuel their conquest of the galaxy, but it had ultimately corrupted them, driving them into madness and civil war that destroyed their civilization from within. The Starforge was both incredibly powerful and incredibly dangerous, a tool that would amplify whoever controlled it, but also corrupt them further with each use. Revan, standing in the temple and learning these truths, made his decision. He would not destroy the Starforge as he had promised the elders. He would claim it, use it, and build an empire the likes of which the galaxy had never seen. He betrayed the elders' trust, took control of the temple systems, and accessed the Starforge. The ancient station came to life, its systems activating after millennia of dormancy, beginning the process of converting stellar energy and dark side power into material form. Revan declared himself the Dark Lord of the Sith, and Malak became his apprentice. This formalization of their hierarchy was necessary. The Sith followed the rule of the strong, where power determined position. Revan was the more powerful of the two, the better strategist, the one whose vision would guide their conquest. Malak accepted the role of apprentice, at least initially, because it aligned with the reality of their respective abilities. But accepting a subservient position did not come naturally to someone with Malak's personality and history. He had led armies during the Mandalorian Wars. He had made decisions that affected the fate of entire campaigns. Being reduced to the role of an apprentice, even to someone as powerful as Revan, chafed at his pride. This tension would grow over time, fed by the dark side, nurtured by the ambition that the Starforge's corruption amplified in all who used it. They spent months building their war machine. The Starforge produced vessels at an incredible rate. Hammerhead-class cruisers, the backbone of the Republic fleet, rolled out of its construction bays by the dozens. Fighter craft, support vessels, weapons, supplies. Everything an invasion force might need appeared as if conjured from nothing, though in reality it was being assembled from particles and energy, matter transmuted through processes that blended technology and dark side sorcery in ways that modern science could barely comprehend. Revan and Malak did not merely build ships. They converted people. Veterans of the Mandalorian Wars, soldiers who had followed them to victory against the Mandalorians, were approached and recruited. Some came willingly, convinced by Revan's vision of a strong, unified galaxy under Sith rule. Others required more persuasion. Dark side users, former Jedi who had walked similar paths and felt the call of power, joined their cause. Even Jedi still nominally loyal to the Republic found themselves slowly corrupted, their service in the Mandalorian Wars having already cracked their commitment to the Jedi Code, making them vulnerable to recruitment. In 3,959 years before the Battle of Yavin, Revan and Malak revealed themselves to the Republic. Their armada emerged from the unknown regions, a fleet so vast that Republic intelligence could not determine where it had come from or how it had been assembled. The attack was coordinated and devastating. Multiple systems came under assault simultaneously. The Republic military, still recovering from the Mandalorian Wars, found itself facing enemies who knew their tactics, who had fought alongside many of them, who understood exactly where the Republic's weaknesses lay. The Jedi Order was horrified. The heroes they had opposed but ultimately acknowledged had become the very thing the Order was sworn to fight. Revan and Malak, now openly calling themselves Sith Lords, declared that the Jedi Council's tyranny would end, that their weak philosophy had allowed the galaxy to fall into chaos, that only through strength and centralized control could true peace be achieved. It was a perverse mirror of the arguments they had made at the start of the Mandalorian Wars, the same rhetoric about the necessity of action twisted to serve dark purposes. What followed became known as the Jedi Civil War, though that name was something of a misnomer. This was not a civil war within the Jedi Order, though certainly some Jedi did fall to the dark side and join the Sith. It was a war for the soul of the galaxy, with the Sith seeking to overthrow the Republic and replace it with an empire built on dark side principles, and the Jedi desperately trying to prevent that outcome. Malak commanded fleets and forces throughout this conflict. He was Revan's primary military commander, the enforcer who broke resistance through overwhelming force. His reputation from the Mandalorian Wars preceded him, but now the respect that soldiers had felt turned to fear. Malak was no longer the heroic general who fought to protect innocents. He was something far darker, a Sith who seemed to take pleasure in destruction, who reduced worlds to submission not through careful conquest, but through terror and annihilation. His tactical approach differed significantly from Revan's. Where Revan planned careful campaigns designed to convert Republic infrastructure and forces to Sith control, Malak preferred overwhelming shows of force. He would arrive at a system and issue an ultimatum: surrender immediately or face complete destruction. Those who resisted found their worlds bombarded, their military forces obliterated, their populations terrorized. Malak was building a reputation as a Sith Lord who showed no mercy, who could not be reasoned with or negotiated with, who saw compassion as weakness. This difference in approach created the first real tensions between Revan and Malak. Revan wanted to build an empire that could actually function, that could maintain control after the initial conquest. Malak's scorched earth tactics were effective at breaking resistance, but left worlds economically devastated and filled with populations who would never accept Sith rule willingly. Revan tried to moderate his apprentices' behavior to channel Malak's aggression toward more productive ends. Malak saw these attempts at moderation as weakness. He believed that Revan was being too soft, too concerned with preserving what he conquered, too willing to show mercy to enemies who deserved none. In Malak's view, the galaxy needed to be completely broken before it could be properly rebuilt. Half measures and strategic restraint would only prolong the conflict and give their enemies hope. The only path to victory was total, uncompromising destruction of all resistance. These philosophical differences came to a head in a confrontation aboard Revan's flagship. The exact circumstances are not recorded in histories that have survived, but what we know is that Malak openly challenged Revan's methods, accused him of being too weak to do what was necessary. The argument escalated from words to action. Lightsabers were ignited. Master and apprentice fought, and in that duel something happened that would mark Malak for the rest of his life. Revan's lightsaber strike caught Malak across the lower jaw. The blade, that concentrated beam of plasma contained within a force-generated field, cut through Malak's jaw and removed it entirely, along with significant portions of surrounding tissue. It was a devastating injury, one that should have been fatal. Under normal circumstances, someone who sustained such damage would bleed out in seconds. But Malak was not operating under normal circumstances. He was a powerful Sith Lord, and he used the Force to sustain himself, to slow the bleeding, to keep himself alive long enough to receive medical attention. The injury was too severe to heal completely, even with Bacta and Force healing techniques. Malak's lower jaw was gone, destroyed, and it could not be regrown. The best that Sith medical technology could offer was a cybernetic replacement, a metal prosthesis that covered the lower half of his face and provided the structural support his face needed. Integrated into this prosthesis was a vocabulator, a device that would allow him to speak, despite lacking the organic structures normally required for speech. The vocabulator translated the signals Malak generated into sound, but the result was not quite natural. His voice took on a cold, mechanical quality, a resonant tone that had an unsettling effect on those who heard it. The physical transformation reinforced the internal one. Malak looked into reflective surfaces and saw a monster looking back. The handsome young Jedi who had trained on Dantooine, whose smile had charmed friends, and whose passionate arguments had converted others to the revanchist cause, was gone. In his place was something that looked like a machine built for war, a Sith Lord whose very appearance spoke of violence and suffering. The metal jaw became his most distinctive feature, a constant reminder of his defeat, a symbol of his evolution from Jedi to Sith. Interestingly, the duel and Malak's horrific injury did not result in a permanent break with Revan. Malak accepted his defeat, acknowledged that Revan was the stronger, and continued to serve as his apprentice. But the resentment festered. Every time Malak saw his reflection, every time he spoke through the vocabulator, he was reminded that Revan had done this to him. The wound was both physical and psychological, a humiliation that could never be entirely forgiven, only buried and left to poison the relationship from within. The Jedi Civil War ground on. Republic systems fell one by one to the Sith Armada. Jedi died or turned to the dark side in alarming numbers. The Order, which had stood for millennia as guardians of peace, found itself facing potential extinction. The Republic Senate, which had governed the galaxy for centuries, saw its authority eroding as system after system either fell to the Sith or declared independence rather than face destruction. The galaxy was fracturing, and it seemed that no force could stop the Sith's advance. The Jedi Council recognized that conventional military response was failing. They needed something different, some way to strike at the heart of Sith power rather than just defending against attacks. They knew that the Sith fleet was being produced somewhere, that Revan and Malak must have discovered some ancient technology or weapon that gave them this incredible manufacturing capacity. But where this factory was located, how it operated, remained a mystery. What the Council did know was that Revan was the strategic mind behind the Sith invasion. Take out Revan, they reasoned, and the Sith Empire might collapse, or at least be sufficiently disrupted to give the Republic time to mount a proper defense. They assembled a strike team of Jedi, led by a young knight named Bastila Shan, whose rare gift of battle meditation made her particularly valuable. Battle meditation was a force ability that allowed its practitioner to influence the flow of combat across an entire battlefield, strengthening allies and weakening enemies through the Force. In larger engagements, a skilled battle meditation practitioner could turn the tide of war. The strike team located Revan's flagship and mounted a bold assault. They fought through Sith forces, pushed their way to the bridge, and confronted Revan himself. The Dark Lord killed several of the Jedi who attacked him, his combat abilities far exceeding what most of them had anticipated. But Bastila and 3 other Jedi managed to corner him, and for a moment it seemed the mission might succeed. Malak, commanding his own vessel nearby, sensed through the Force that Revan was in danger. This was the moment that defines Darth Malak in historical memory more than any other. His master, the Dark Lord he served, was under attack by Jedi. Malak had the fleet and the firepower to intervene, to save Revan and eliminate the strike team. Instead, he made a different choice. He ordered his flagship to open fire on Revan's vessel. The massive turbo laser batteries, weapons designed to destroy other capital ships, targeted the bridge where Revan was fighting. The strike was devastating. Explosions ripped through the command deck, killing or injuring everyone present. In the chaos, as the bridge tore apart and bodies were thrown through the air, Bastila Shan managed to use the Force to push Revan away from the worst of the blast. She pulled him from the wreckage, badly wounded and unconscious, and managed to escape with him before Malak's ships could board the damaged vessel. Malak convinced himself that Revan must have died in the attack. His master was powerful, yes, but no one could survive turbo laser fire at such close range. The strike had been necessary. Revan's tactical genius had made him irreplaceable, but his soft approach to conquest had also been limiting the Sith Empire's potential. With Revan gone, Malak could prosecute the war as it needed to be fought, with absolute brutality and no restraint. He declared himself the Dark Lord of the Sith, taking the title and position that had belonged to Revan. There was no real opposition to this claim. Malak commanded the largest fleet and had Revan's apparent death as justification for the transfer of power. Other Sith Lords who might have challenged him recognized that Malak had the strength to destroy any rivals. The rule of the strong had been satisfied. Malak was now the supreme authority of the Sith Empire. His first act as Dark Lord was to take an apprentice of his own. He chose a fallen Jedi named Darth Bandon, a young human who had been one of the most promising students at the Jedi Academy before giving in to his hunger for power and joining the Sith. Bandon was cruel, arrogant, and utterly devoted to the dark side. He was exactly the kind of apprentice Malak wanted, someone who would execute orders without question, who would not challenge him as he had challenged Revan. Under Malak's leadership, the Sith war effort became even more brutal. Where Revan had shown some strategic restraint, Malak showed none. He implemented a policy of systematic destruction. Worlds that resisted were not merely conquered, but made examples of. Their surfaces bombarded until they were uninhabitable, their populations killed or scattered. The message was clear: surrender immediately or face annihilation. One of the most infamous examples of Malak's approach came when his forces discovered the location of the Jedi hiding on Taris. This ecumenopolis, a planet-wide city divided into stratified levels based on wealth and status, had harbored Jedi refugees who were trying to evade Sith detection. Malak's response was disproportionate even by the standards of the war. He ordered the complete destruction of the entire planet. The bombardment of Taris was methodical and total. Malak's fleet surrounded the planet and began systematically destroying every structure on the surface. The wealthy upper levels, where the elite lived in luxury, were vaporized first. Then the middle levels, where ordinary citizens tried to maintain some semblance of normal life. Finally, the lower levels, where the poor survived in squalor and darkness, were bombarded into rubble. Billions died in the attack, and the few survivors fled underground, reduced to subsistence existence among the ruins. Militarily, the destruction of Taris accomplished little. The Jedi who had been there managed to escape before the bombardment began, taking with them the person Malak was actually trying to capture. But that wasn't the point. Malak wanted to send a message to the Republic and the Jedi. He wanted them to understand that he would stop at nothing, that no price was too high, that he would burn entire worlds to ash if it served his purposes. The destruction of Taris achieved that goal. After Taris, fewer systems were willing to harbor Jedi refugees. More systems surrendered without resistance when Sith forces arrived. But Malak's methods had consequences beyond simple terror. The Republic military and populace began to fight with the desperation of people who knew they faced total extinction. Surrendering to Revan had offered the hope of surviving under Sith rule. Surrendering to Malak meant probable death or enslavement. This realization actually stiffened resistance in some sectors, as people concluded they had nothing to lose by fighting to the bitter end. Malak's obsession during this period focused on a specific target. Bastila Shan, the Jedi Knight, who had led the strike team against Revan, possessed battle meditation of extraordinary power. Her ability to effect large-scale battles made her a strategic threat to the Sith war effort. Every engagement where Bastila participated saw Republic forces fighting with enhanced coordination and morale, while Sith forces found themselves hampered and disrupted. If Malak could capture Bastila, kill her, or turn her to the dark side, he would eliminate this advantage and possibly gain it for himself. He devoted enormous resources to hunting her. Bounty hunters, Sith assassins, entire fleets were dispatched with standing orders to capture Bastila alive if possible, kill her if capture proved impossible. The chase led across the galaxy, with Bastila narrowly escaping multiple traps. Malak's frustration grew with each failed attempt. How could one Jedi prove so elusive? How could she continue to slip through his grasp despite the massive resources he deployed? What Malak did not know, what no one in the Sith Empire knew, was that Bastila had not let Revan die when she pulled him from his burning flagship. She had brought him back to the Jedi Council where they made a controversial decision. Rather than execute the Dark Lord or attempt to imprison someone so powerful, they chose a third option. They used the Force to wipe Revan's memories, to give him a new identity, to essentially create a new person using the body and Force abilities of the former Dark Lord. This reconstituted Revan had no memory of his fall, no knowledge of the Sith Empire he had built, no awareness that he had once been the galaxy's greatest threat. The Council's plan was to use this new Revan as a weapon against the Sith. They would train him as a Republic agent, have him work alongside Bastila, and use the Force bond that had formed between them when she saved his life to guide him toward discovering the Star Forge. Once they learned where the Sith fleet was being produced, they could mount a proper assault and destroy it, eliminating the strategic advantage that was allowing Malak to maintain his war of conquest. For more than a year, this plan progressed without Malak's knowledge. The reconstituted Revan, believing himself to be a Republic soldier, traveled the galaxy following the same trail of star maps that he had once followed as a Sith Lord. He built a team of companions, including Bastila, the smuggler Karth Onasi, the Wookiee Zalbar, and his friend Mission Vao, the Jedi Jolee Bindo, the Mandalorian Canderous Ordo, and even the assassin droid HK-47 that Revan himself had built during his time as Dark Lord. This team eluded Malak's efforts to capture them through a combination of skill, luck, and the fact that Malak did not realize who he was actually hunting. He knew Bastila was with this group. He sent bounty hunters after them, including the infamous Kalo Nord. But he thought he was chasing a random Republic soldier who had somehow gotten involved in matters beyond his understanding. He had no idea that his former master, the Dark Lord he had betrayed, was alive and working to destroy the empire they had built together. The truth came out aboard the Leviathan, Malak's personal flagship. Admiral Saul Karath, who had once served the Republic before joining the Sith, managed to capture the Ebon Hawk, the ship Revan's team was using. The prisoners were brought aboard and subjected to interrogation. Malak himself came to observe, curious about the Republic agent who had caused so much disruption to Sith operations. When he saw the prisoner's face, Malak felt a shock of recognition that went beyond simple visual identification. The Force itself seemed to scream that something was wrong, that this person was not what he appeared. Malak reached out with the Force, probing the prisoner's mind, and discovered the truth. The Council had not killed Revan. They had hidden him, altered him, turned him into their pawn. The Dark Lord still lived, but he had been transformed into a Jedi weapon pointed at the Sith Empire. Malak's reaction was complex. Rage, certainly, that his former master had survived and been turned against him, but also fear because if Revan regained his memories, if he became once again the brilliant strategist and powerful Force user he had been, then Malak's position as Dark Lord would be in jeopardy. And beneath both rage and fear, there was a twisted sort of satisfaction. Here was his chance to prove that he had surpassed Revan, that the apprentice had become the master in truth as well as title. He revealed the truth to Revan with calculated cruelty. He explained how the Jedi Council had used him, how they had stolen his identity and turned him into a puppet. He described the empire they had built together, the power they had wielded, the conquest they had nearly completed. He offered Revan the chance to reclaim his identity, to remember who he truly was, to return to the dark side and join Malak as an equal. The revelation shattered Revan's sense of self. Everything he thought he knew about his identity was revealed as a lie constructed by the Jedi Council. His memories, his personality, his very sense of who he was had been artificially created. The psychological trauma was immense. In the chaos of this identity crisis, Bastila sacrificed herself, allowing herself to be captured so that Revan and the others could escape. Malak took Bastila to the Star Forge. He subjected her to torture, both physical and psychological, designed to break her will and turn her to the dark side. He showed her the futility of the Republic's resistance, demonstrated the inevitable victory of the Sith, tempted her with the power that awaited if she would only embrace the dark side and join him. For someone as powerful in the Force as Bastila, for someone whose battle meditation was so critical to the Republic war effort, the temptation was immense. She could end the war by joining the Sith. She could save countless lives by ensuring quick Sith victory rather than prolonged conflict. Malak was very persuasive, and he had time and the resources of the Star Forge at his disposal. Eventually, Bastila fell. She gave in to the pain, the fear, the seductive promise of power. She became Malak's new apprentice, replacing Darth Bandon, who had been killed by Revan during his quest to find the Star Forge. With Bastila at his side, using her battle meditation to strengthen Sith forces and weaken Republic resistance, Malak believed he had finally achieved invincibility. The war would be over within months, the Republic would fall, and he would rule the galaxy as the Dark Lord of the Sith, with no master to serve and no rival to challenge him. But Malak had made several critical miscalculations. He had underestimated Revan's resilience and ability to choose his own path despite the psychological trauma of his revelation. He had underestimated the loyalty of Revan's companions, who stood by him even knowing the truth of his identity. And most critically, he had failed to understand that the Star Forge itself was as much a danger to him as it was a weapon against his enemies. The ancient Rakatan device amplified dark side power, yes, but it also fed on that power, draining its users even as it empowered them. The more Malak used the Star Forge, the more dependent on it he became. He had increased its production capacity by 300% beyond what Revan had achieved, an improvement born of desperation and dark side sorcery. But this improvement came at a cost. Malak was becoming a conduit for the Star Forge's dark power, less a user of the station and more its servant. He had also begun using the Star Forge in a way that Revan never had. Malak captured Jedi who fell into his hands and brought them to the station. He kept them alive in stasis, suspended in the Star Forge's chambers, and used their Force energy to power himself. When he fought, when he needed to heal damage or enhance his abilities, Malak would drain the life force of these captive Jedi, adding their power to his own. It was a grotesque perversion of the Force, turning the energy of light side users into fuel for dark side power. This technique made Malak incredibly dangerous in direct combat. As long as he had Jedi prisoners to drain, he was nearly impossible to defeat in a conventional duel. Damage that should have been fatal could be instantly healed by draining a captive. Exhaustion from extended fighting could be eliminated by drawing on their life energy. Malak had become a vampire of sorts, sustaining himself on the force energy of those he kept imprisoned for that purpose. The Republic's situation became desperate. System after system failed. The Jedi Order was reduced to a shadow of its former strength. The Senate prepared evacuation plans for Coruscant itself, acknowledging that the capital might fall. Malak stood on the edge of total victory, commanding the Star Forge and an armada that seemed endless, served by a fallen Jedi whose battle meditation tilted every engagement in his favor, possessing dark side power that made him nearly invincible in combat. And then Revan came to the Star Forge. The Jedi had been discovered by the Republic fleet, and they arrived en masse in the Lehon system. The Battle of Rakata Prime began with an engagement between capital ships that would determine the fate of the galaxy. Admiral Thorn Dodonna commanded the Republic fleet from the bridge of the flagship Inexpugnable, while Malak commanded the Sith forces from the Star Forge itself. Ships burned and died in the vacuum of space. The Star Forge produced new vessels, even as Republic forces destroyed them, seeming to prove that Malak's victory was inevitable. But then Revan did something unexpected. He boarded the Star Forge, penetrating its defenses with his small team, and he confronted Bastila directly. Rather than attempting to kill his former companion, Revan appealed to the light side that remained buried within her. He reminded her of who she had been, what she had stood for, the bond they shared through the Force. And against all likelihood, Bastila found the strength to reject the dark side, to return to the light, to turn her battle meditation against the Sith forces she had been strengthening. The shift in the battle was immediate and dramatic. Republic forces suddenly fought with enhanced coordination and morale. Sith ships found their crews hampered by doubt and confusion. The endless stream of vessels from the Star Forge meant little when they were being destroyed faster than they could be deployed. The tide of battle turned, and Malak felt it through the Force, felt his careful plans dissolving, felt victory slipping away. He prepared himself for the final confrontation he had always known was coming. Revan would come for him. His former master, now redeemed and strengthened by the return to the light, would challenge him for control of the Star Forge. And in that duel, one of them would die. Malak ensured that every defense the Star Forge possessed was activated. He positioned his most powerful war droids at strategic points. He waited in the observatory chamber at the heart of the station, surrounded by the captive Jedi whose force energy he would drain to sustain himself through the coming battle. When Revan finally arrived, Malak was ready. The Dark Lord of the Sith stood before his former master and apprentice, the student who had betrayed him, killed him, stolen his empire, and now had come to take it all back. The metal jaw that Revan had given him in their earlier duel reflected the light of their ignited lightsabers. His voice, distorted by the vocabulator, spoke words of contempt and challenge. The duel that followed would be remembered as one of the most significant lightsaber combats in galactic history. Two of the most powerful Force users of their era, former friends who had become bitter enemies, fighting with everything they possessed. Revan had regained his full memories, his mastery of the Force, his combat abilities honed by years of warfare. Malak had the raw power of the dark side amplified by the Starforge itself, the ability to drain captive Jedi to sustain him, the desperate fury of someone fighting for his empire and his very identity. They fought through the Starforge's corridors and chambers, the battle ranging across the ancient station. Every time Malak seemed close to defeat, he would withdraw and drain another captive Jedi, healing his wounds and returning to the fight with renewed strength. Revan could not simply overpower him. He had to destroy the containment fields holding the captive Jedi, freeing them from Malak's reach, eliminating the source of his regenerative power. One by one, the containment fields fell. One by one, the captive Jedi were freed or died from the shock of having their Force energy suddenly restored to them. Malak found himself increasingly isolated, unable to sustain himself, feeling his power draining away as the Starforge itself began to fail under the assault of the Republic fleet. The final exchange came in the observatory chamber, with the Starforge crumbling around them and the sounds of battle audible even through the station's massive structure. Revan and Malak faced each other one last time, and in that moment, something unexpected happened. Malak's rage began to fade, replaced by a terrible clarity. He could feel the dark side leaving him as death approached. He could feel the weight of what he had done, the lives he had destroyed, the person he had become. He spoke his last words not with the anger of a Sith, but with the regret of someone who finally understood how far he had fallen and how much he had lost. He acknowledged that Revan had been the stronger of them, that the destiny of the Dark Lord had been Revan's to claim, never his. He wondered aloud what might have happened if their positions had been reversed, if he had been the one captured by the Jedi, if he could have returned to the light as Revan had. In those final moments, the Sith Lord Darth Malak became again, briefly, Alec, the young Jedi who had wanted to save the galaxy. Revan's final lightsaber strike ended Malak's life. The Dark Lord fell, his body collapsing to the deck of the Starforge. Around him, the ancient station shuddered and groaned as Republic forces systematically destroyed its structure. The Starforge that had been the source of the Sith fleet was dying, and it would take Malak's body with it, consumed by the fires of its destruction. The Jedi Civil War ended with Malak's death. The Sith Empire, deprived of its leader and its production facility, collapsed. Surviving Sith forces scattered across the galaxy, some continuing to fight as independent warlords, others going into hiding to wait for a better opportunity. The Republic had won, but at tremendous cost. Thousands of Jedi were dead. Entire worlds had been destroyed. The scars of the war would take decades to heal, if they ever healed completely. Malak's legacy was complex. To the Republic, he was a monster, a Sith Lord whose cruelty and brutality had brought the galaxy to the brink of destruction. To those who had known him as a Jedi, he was a tragedy, a good man corrupted by war and dark side power, who had lost himself so completely that redemption came only at the moment of death. To historians, he was a cautionary tale about how even the most idealistic warriors could be transformed into tyrants when they compromised their principles in pursuit of victory. His story, from refugee child to Jedi hero to Sith Lord, illustrated the seductive nature of the dark side and the consequences of allowing trauma and anger to guide one's choices. The boy from Quayle had wanted to prevent others from suffering as he had suffered, The Sith Lord who died on the Star Forge had caused suffering on a scale that dwarfed even the Mandalorian Wars that had shaped him. The road to darkness is paved with good intentions, and Darth Malak had walked that road to its bitter end. The reconstituted Revan, the man the Jedi Council had created from the shattered remnants of a Sith Lord's memories, spent more than a year unaware of his true identity. He believed himself to be a Republic soldier, someone who had joined the fight against the Sith out of a sense of duty and justice. The Force bond he shared with Bastila Shan, formed when she saved him from death aboard his flagship, guided him without his conscious awareness. The Council had carefully constructed his false memories, giving him a personality and history that would motivate him to seek out the Star Forge while believing the quest was his own choice. His journey took him to the same worlds Revan and Malak had visited years before, Dantooine, where he trained at the Jedi Enclave and unknowingly walked paths that Alec had once walked as a Padawan. Tatooine's desert wastes, where he fought through sand people and searched ancient ruins for star maps. Kashyyyk's dangerous Shadowlands, navigating the deadly flora and fauna to reach Rakatan technology hidden in the forest depths. Manaan's underwater facilities, where political intrigue and natural dangers both threatened his mission. Each location brought him closer to discovering the Star Forge's location, and each location brought back unconscious echoes of memories that had been buried but not entirely destroyed. His companions became the key to his survival and success. Bastila Shan, sworn to guide and protect him while hiding the truth of his identity, provided Force abilities that complemented his own. Karth Onasi, a Republic war hero and pilot who had served under Revan during the Mandalorian Wars, brought military experience and a deep personal hatred of the Sith, whose forces had killed his family and destroyed his home. Mission Vao, a young Twi'lek girl with street smarts and fierce loyalty, and her Wookiee companion Dalbar, provided ground-level perspective and skills that more formal warriors lacked. Jolee Bindo, an elderly Jedi who had left the Order decades ago after watching his wife fall to the dark side, offered wisdom born of hard experience. He had seen how the Jedi Code could be both guide and trap, how following it too rigidly or abandoning it entirely both led to disaster. His presence served as a reminder that the Force was more complex than the simple light side versus dark side dichotomy that the Jedi taught. Canderous Ordo, a Mandalorian mercenary who had fought against Revan during the Mandalorian Wars and now served him out of respect for a worthy opponent, provided tactical military knowledge and a warrior's perspective on honor and duty. Even HK-47, the assassin droid that Revan himself had built during his time as Dark Lord, joined the crew, though he carefully concealed his true nature and origin. The droid's vocabulator made him refer to organic beings as meatbags, a programming quirk that had amused the Sith Lord who created him. HK-47 recognized his former master immediately, but said nothing, following protocols that had been embedded deep in his programming to protect Revan's secrets. Together, this disparate group managed to stay ahead of Malak's pursuit. When the Dark Lord sent Kalo Nord, one of the galaxy's most feared bounty hunters, to capture or kill them, they defeated him on Tatooine. When Darth Bandon, Malak's Sith apprentice, tracked them down with orders to eliminate Bastila, they killed him as well, though not without significant effort. Each victory against Malak's forces boosted Revan's confidence, even as he remained unaware of his connection to the very empire he was fighting against. But Malak had resources and patience. Admiral Saul Karath, who commanded the Sith fleet and had once been Karth Onassi's commanding officer in the Republic Navy, laid a trap. He tracked the Ebon Hawk, the light freighter that served as Revan's team's transport, and used an interdictor cruiser to pull it out of hyperspace. The Leviathan, Malak's personal flagship and one of the most powerful warships in the Sith fleet, captured the smaller vessel. Revan and his companions found themselves imprisoned aboard the very ship from which Malak commanded its conquest of the galaxy. Karath interrogated them personally, using torture to try to extract information about Republic military positions and strategies. He paid particular attention to Karth, his former subordinate who had refused to follow him into the Sith Empire. The betrayal of a trusted mentor had wounded Karth deeply, and Karath seemed to take pleasure in demonstrating how wrong Karth had been to maintain loyalty to the Republic's failing cause. But Karath underestimated his prisoners. They managed to escape their cells, fought through Sith troops, and made their way toward the hangar where the Ebon Hawk was docked. Karath confronted them directly, leading a squad of elite Sith soldiers. The battle was brutal, and the Admiral fought with the desperation of someone who knew defeat meant death. Karth, facing the man who had once been his mentor, channeled years of anger and grief into the confrontation. When Karath finally fell, mortally wounded, he used his last moments to deliver a final psychological blow. He told Karth that Revan, the man he had been traveling with, was not who he seemed. He was the Dark Lord, the architect of the Jedi Civil War, the Sith who had ordered the death of Karth's family and countless others. Before the team could process this revelation, Malak arrived. The Dark Lord of the Sith entered the hangar with an escort of guards. His metal jaw and imposing presence instantly commanded attention. He dismissed his guards, wanting to handle this situation personally. When he saw Revan's face, the moment of recognition was visceral. This was impossible. He had killed Revan, or so he believed. The turbo-laser strike that had torn apart his master's flagship should have killed everyone on the bridge. Yet here stood Revan, alive, whole, and apparently working for the Republic. Malak reached out with the Force, probing Revan's mind, and discovered the truth that Karath had revealed to Karth. The Jedi Council's audacity in rewriting the Dark Lord's mind, turning him into a weapon against the Sith, both impressed and enraged Malak. He saw an opportunity, a chance to reclaim his former master, or, failing that, to prove definitively that he had surpassed him. If he could defeat Revan, turn him back to the dark side, or kill him, any doubt about Malak's legitimacy as Dark Lord would be erased. The revelation of Revan's true identity shattered the psychological foundation on which his current personality rested. Everything he believed about himself was a lie constructed by the Jedi Council. Every memory, every sense of who he was had been artificially implanted. The person he thought he was did not exist and had never existed. He was Darth Revan, Dark Lord of the Sith, architect of the Jedi Civil War, betrayer of the Republic, murderer of countless innocents. The knowledge created an identity crisis so profound that he could barely function. Malak offered him a choice. He could reclaim his identity as Dark Lord, could remember his true power, could stand beside Malak as an equal and complete the conquest they had started together. Or he could continue living the lie the Jedi had constructed, could pretend to be someone he was not, could serve the Jedi who had violated his mind so completely. Malak presented this choice as obvious. Who would choose to remain a puppet when they could be a master? Who would choose weakness when they could reclaim strength? Bastila interrupted this psychological assault. She had kept Revan's true identity secret because the Council believed it was necessary. But she had come to care for him as the person he had become, not the Sith Lord he had been. She positioned herself between Revan and Malak, using her battle meditation to enhance her companion's abilities while weakening the Dark Lord. She told Revan that he could choose who he wanted to be, that the past did not have to define him, that he could be better than Darth Revan had been. Malak, recognizing that he could not overcome Bastila's battle meditation and the team's combined strength while also trying to turn Revan, made his own choice. He allowed Bastila to sacrifice herself, let her tell the others to flee while she held him off. He wanted Bastila anyway, wanted to break her and turn her into his new apprentice now that Darth Bandon was dead. And he wanted Revan to suffer, to know that his friend had fallen because of his weakness. The psychological torture would be far more effective than anything physical. Revan and the others escaped aboard the Ebon Hawk, but the revelation of his identity had fundamentally changed the group's dynamics. Karth struggled with the knowledge that he had been following the man responsible for his family's death. Mission and Zalbar had difficulty reconciling the kind leader they knew with the monster of legend. Even Jolee, who tried to maintain perspective, found himself unsettled by the magnitude of the Council's manipulation. Bastila's sacrifice added guilt to the complex mix of emotions Revan was experiencing. They returned to Dantooine, to the Jedi Enclave, where the Council could provide guidance. The Masters acknowledged what they had done, justified it as necessary to save the Republic, and insisted that Revan could still choose to serve the light. They had given him the opportunity to redeem himself, to use his knowledge of Sith tactics and his connection to Bastila to find the Star Forge and destroy it. What he did with that opportunity was ultimately his choice, but they urged him to complete the mission, to prove that he could be better than he had been. Revan faced a genuinely difficult decision. He could reclaim his identity as Dark Lord, could tap into the power and knowledge that had made him the most feared Sith in the galaxy. The dark side was still there, waiting, familiar in a way that his constructed personality was not. Or he could choose to remain as he was, to build a new identity based not on what he had been, but on what he wanted to become. The person he was now opposed everything the Sith stood for. Could he trust that person, that constructed identity, more than his original self? He chose the light, not because the Jedi Council commanded it, not because Bastila had sacrificed herself, but because when he examined his own heart, when he used the Force to look inward, he found that the constructed personality felt more true to his essential self than the memories of being a Sith Lord. He had been corrupted by the Emperor, twisted into something dark and terrible. The Council had given him a chance to start over, and he would take it. He would find the Star Forge, rescue Bastila if possible, defeat Malak, and end the war he had started. The final pieces of the puzzle came together. The star maps revealed the location of Rakata Prime, hidden in the unknown regions and protected by ancient defenses. Revan and his team braved the planetary disruption field, crash-landed on one of Lehan's islands, and found themselves among the primitive descendants of the once mighty Rakata. The planet's tribal politics required navigation, but eventually Revan gained access to the Temple of the Ancients. The ancient computers within still functioned, and they provided the final piece of information: the Star Forge's exact location and the means to deactivate the disruption field that protected it. The Republic fleet, led by Admiral Thorn Dodonna and including Jedi Masters like Vandar Tokare, arrived in the system as planned. When Revan disabled the disruption field from the Temple summit, the fleet was able to engage the Star Forge directly. The Battle of Rakata Prime began with a massive space engagement. Sith vessels poured from the Star Forge's construction bays while Republic capital ships hammered away at the ancient station's defenses. The battle seemed impossible, the Sith fleet endless, until Bastila's battle meditation suddenly turned against the Sith forces. Revan had boarded the Star Forge with a small team. Fighting through automated defenses and Sith troops, they carved their way deeper into the station, heading for the heart, where Malak waited. Along the way, Revan encountered Bastila. She had been tortured and broken, turned to the dark side, and now served as Malak's apprentice. She attacked Revan with all the power of a Jedi turned Sith, her lightsaber blazing red instead of the yellow it had once been. Her battle meditation used to weaken him rather than strengthen him. The confrontation between them was as much psychological as physical. Bastila accused Revan of weakness, of abandoning the power they could have shared, of betraying everything they had fought for. She spoke with Malak's words, with the dark side's seductive promises, trying to break Revan's resolve as Malak had broken hers. But Revan refused to fight her as an enemy. He reminded her of who she had been, of the principles she had stood for, of the bond they shared that went deeper than the Force. He told her that love was stronger than fear, that she could return to the light if she chose to, that he would not give up on her no matter how far she had fallen. Against everything Malak had taught her, against the weight of the dark side corruption that had consumed her, Bastila found the strength to resist. She remembered herself, remembered what she had valued before the torture and manipulation. She severed her connection to the dark side in a moment of profound will, nearly destroying herself in the process, and returned to the light. Her battle meditation, now freed from Sith control, turned toward supporting the Republic fleet. The tide of battle shifted dramatically. Sith forces found themselves confused and demoralized. Republic ships pressed their attack with renewed vigor. The Star Forge's seemingly infinite production could not compensate for the sudden strategic disadvantage. Malak felt the shift through the Force. In his command center, deep within the Star Forge, surrounded by the captive Jedi he had imprisoned to fuel his power, he understood that his victory was slipping away. Bastila had been the key to his strategy, the weapon that made his forces invincible. Without her battle meditation supporting them, the Sith fleet was just a fleet, and the Republic had more resources, better tactics, and the backing of the surviving Jedi Order. He had lost before Revan ever reached him, but he would not surrender. He would fight to the bitter end, and perhaps in that final confrontation, he could achieve the victory that had been denied him. He prepared the Star Forge's defenses with meticulous care. Ancient Rakatan war droids designed for combat against Force users were activated and positioned at strategic choke points. Force fields channeled any assault toward the observatory where Malak waited, and the captive Jedi, suspended in their stasis chambers, provided the dark side power he would need to fuel his abilities during the coming duel. Malak had studied the Star Forge's mechanisms during his time as Dark Lord, had pushed its dark side enhancement beyond anything Revan had achieved. He understood how to draw on its power, how to amplify his own abilities through the suffering of the Jedi he had imprisoned. If Revan wanted to face him, Revan would have to overcome every advantage the Star Forge could provide. The path through the Star Forge was a gauntlet. Revan fought through waves of dark Jedi, defeated the mass of war droids, and survived traps that should have killed anyone without profound connection to the Force. His companions had stayed behind to support Bastila and help coordinate the Republic fleet's assault, so Revan faced these challenges alone. Every step forward was a struggle, but he persisted, driven by the knowledge that Malak had to be stopped, that the war would continue as long as the Dark Lord lived. When Revan finally reached the observatory, he found Malak waiting in a chamber dominated by the cylindrical stasis fields containing captured Jedi. These prisoners were barely alive, their life energy slowly being drained to feed the Star Forge's dark power. Some were Jedi Revan had known during the Mandalorian Wars, knights who had followed him into battle and been captured during the Jedi Civil War. Seeing them like this, suspended in torment, their Force energy stolen to fuel Malak's power, reinforced Revan's determination. This had to end. Malak spoke first, his voice resonating through the vocabulator, the mechanical tone giving his words an inhuman quality. He acknowledged that Revan had proven stronger than he expected, that the redeemed Jedi had overcome challenges that should have stopped him. But Malak remained confident. Here, in the heart of the Star Forge, surrounded by dark side energy and with access to the captive Jedi's power, he believed himself invincible. He would break Revan's will as he had broken Bastila's, would force his former master to acknowledge that the dark side was superior, that Malak had achieved what Revan could not. The duel began with explosive force. Two of the most powerful Force users in the galaxy, former friends and allies who had become bitter enemies, clashed with lightsabers and Force abilities that would have killed lesser opponents instantly. Revan fought with the techniques of a Jedi Master, using the light side to enhance his abilities while maintaining the mental clarity and emotional balance that the Jedi Code promoted. Malak fought with pure dark side power, channeling his hatred and pain into devastating attacks, using the Star Forge's corruption to amplify his strength beyond natural limits. The combat ranged throughout the observatory and into connecting chambers. When they locked sabers, the force of their collision sent shock waves through the Force that sensitives on distant ships could feel. When they used Force powers against each other, the very air seemed to crack and tear. Revan's superior technique, tactical thinking, gave him an advantage, but Malak's raw power and willingness to draw on the dark side without reservation balanced the equation. Every time Revan seemed close to victory, every time he landed a critical blow that should have ended the fight, Malak withdrew to one of the stasis chambers. He reached out with the Force, draining the life energy of a captive Jedi, using their power to heal his wounds and restore his strength. The first time this happened, Revan was horrified. He was not just fighting Malak, but also inadvertently causing the death of Jedi who had been imprisoned and tortured. Each time Malak drained one of the captives, their body withered and died, their Force presence extinguished. It was a grotesque perversion of the Force, turning the light side energy of Jedi into fuel for dark side power. Revan understood that he could not win through conventional combat. As long as Malak had access to the captive Jedi, he could sustain himself indefinitely. Instead, Revan focused on destroying the stasis chambers themselves. Between exchanges with Malak, whenever he had a moment, Revan struck at the containment fields, shattering them and freeing the imprisoned Jedi. Some survived the sudden restoration of their Force energy, collapsing to the deck, but alive. Others died instantly, their bodies too weakened by prolonged torture to survive even with their power returned. But each chamber Revan destroyed eliminated one source of Malak's regenerative ability. Malak fought desperately to prevent this, trying to protect the chambers while also defending himself against Revan's assault. The tactical situation became increasingly desperate for the Dark Lord. The Republic fleet was systematically destroying the Star Forge, tearing apart the station section by section. Bastila's battle meditation had turned a space battle into a rout. The ancient station shuddered with each impact, its structural integrity failing, and now Revan was eliminating his ability to sustain himself in combat. As the last stasis chamber fell, as the final captive Jedi either died or escaped, Malak found himself alone with Revan in the dying Star Forge. No more regeneration, no more drawing on tortured Jedi for power, just two Force users, one serving the light and one serving the dark, engaged in a duel that would determine the fate of the galaxy. The mechanical jaw that Revan had given him years ago seemed to mock him, a reminder that he had lost to Revan before and was about to lose again. But something changed in Malak during these final moments. The rage that had sustained him began to fade. The dark side corruption that had defined him for years started to crack. He could feel death approaching, and with it came a terrible clarity. He saw with sudden, overwhelming honesty what he had become, what he had done, the lives he had destroyed in pursuit of power that had brought him nothing but emptiness. The boy from Quayle, the idealistic Jedi, the hero of the Mandalorian Wars, they all seemed like different people, strangers whose choices had led to this moment. He spoke to Revan not with the arrogance of a Sith Lord, but with the regret of a man confronting the consequences of his choices. He acknowledged that Revan had always been the stronger, that the destiny of the Dark Lord had been Revan's to claim or reject, never his. He wondered aloud what might have been different if their positions had been reversed, if he had been the one captured by the Jedi and given a chance at redemption. Could he have found the strength to return to the light as Revan had? Or was he fundamentally too corrupted, too broken by trauma and war and dark side power to ever be saved? He spoke of how it all began, how the Jedi Council had been too slow, too cautious in his eyes. He and Revan had wanted to make a difference, had believed they could save the galaxy if they were just given the chance. They had been right about the Mandalorians being a threat. They had won that war through their intervention, but somewhere along the path from defending the innocent to conquering the galaxy, he had lost himself. He could see that now, in these final moments, though the understanding came too late to change anything. Revan delivered the killing blow with regret rather than triumph. His lightsaber pierced Malak's chest, severing the connections that sustained life. The Dark Lord fell to his knees, his metal jaw hanging slightly open, his eyes losing the golden glow that marked Sith corruption. In death, Malak found a kind of peace that had eluded him in life. The anger and pain that had driven him for so long released their hold. His last words were not a curse or a threat, but an acknowledgement of his failure and a wondering about what might have been. His body collapsed to the deck, the Starforge, as the station shuddered around them. Revan took a moment, honoring the memory of the friend Malak had been before the corruption, before the wars, before everything went wrong. Then he ran. The Starforge was dying, torn apart by Republic turbolaser fire and internal failures as its dark side power source collapsed. Revan fought his way back through collapsing corridors, past buckled bulkheads and failing life support systems, racing against time to reach his ship before the entire structure exploded. He made it. The Ebon Hawk pulled away from the Starforge just as the ancient station entered its final death throes. The massive structure, which had stood for millennia as a testament to Rakatan engineering and dark side power, came apart in a spectacular explosion that illuminated Lehon skies. The Sith fleet, already decimated by Bastila's battle meditation and superior Republic tactics, broke and fled without their Dark Lord's leadership and their factory's production. The Battle of Rakata Prime was over. The Jedi Civil War was over. The Republic had survived. The victory celebration took place on Lehon's surface, at the base of the Temple of the Ancients. Admiral Dodonna and Jedi Master Vandar presented awards to those who had participated in the final battle. Revan and his companions each received the Cross of Glory, the Republic's highest military honor, in recognition of their service. Bastila stood beside Revan, redeemed and restored to the Jedi Order, though she would carry the scars of her fall for the rest of her life. The assembled soldiers and Jedi cheered, grateful for victory, relieved that the war was finally over. But the scars would take generations to heal. Entire worlds had been destroyed during the conflict. Taris lay in ruins, billions dead in Malak's bombardment. Dantooine's Jedi enclave had been razed, its ancient archives lost. Countless other systems had suffered devastation. The Jedi Order, once numbering in the tens of thousands, was reduced to perhaps 100 surviving members. The Republic's economy was shattered, its military depleted, its government's authority weakened by years of losing ground to the Sith. Malak's physical body had been consumed in the Starforge's destruction, but his impact on the galaxy would persist. The methods he had pioneered, using captured Force users as power sources, would be rediscovered by later Sith. His philosophy of absolute destruction rather than strategic conquest influenced dark side practitioners for generations. The Morrigan Scrolls, a collection of his writings on Sith tactics and philosophy, survived his death and circulated among those interested in the dark side, worth thousands of credits to collectors who understood their significance. Historical records of Malak varied in their assessment. Republic propaganda painted him as a monster, pure evil with no redeeming qualities. the ultimate villain whose defeat saved a galaxy. Jedi historians try to present a more nuanced view, seeing him as a tragic figure who had been corrupted by war and trauma, whose fall to the dark side illustrated the dangers of allowing pain and anger to guide one's choices. Mandalorian accounts acknowledged his combat prowess while despising his refusal to show the honor they valued in warfare. Some saw him as a victim of the Emperor Vitiate's manipulation, his mind broken and rewritten by a Sith so powerful that resistance was impossible. Others viewed him as fundamentally weak, someone who lacked the inner strength to resist corruption regardless of external pressure. The truth likely lay somewhere between these extremes. Malak had been shaped by trauma, pushed toward darkness by war, corrupted by the Emperor's touch, and ultimately responsible for his own choices despite all these factors. 4 years after his death, during the events that would be called the Dark Wars, several individuals encountered visions or echoes of Malak. Mitra Surik, the Jedi exile who had activated the mass shadow generator at Malachor V, discovered the lost tomb of the ancient Sith Lord Ludo Kresh on Korriban while exploring a Chirac cave. Within the tomb, trapped in some way by dark side energy or Sith sorcery, she witnessed visions of the past, including images of Malak at the height of his power. These visions suggested that some echo of his presence remained in places touched by the dark side, though whether this represented a true continuation of consciousness or merely recordings in the Force remained unclear. Jedi Master Gnos Dural, an archivist investigating the significance of Revan and Malak to later galactic history, produced holographic records featuring Malak's image. These records, intended for the Jedi archives, attempted to place the events of the Jedi Civil War in context, to help future generations understand how such devastation had occurred and, hopefully, prevent similar catastrophes. Nost Dural noted that while Revan had shown some concern for the Republic's future even in his fall, Malak had demonstrated no such restraint, seeking only to crush all resistance regardless of the consequences. The comparison between Revan and Malak became a common point of discussion in philosophical and historical texts. Both had fallen to the dark side under similar circumstances. Both had commanded Sith empires. Both had threatened the Republic's survival. Yet their approaches differed significantly. Revan, even at his darkest, maintained strategic thinking and long-term planning. He conquered worlds to build an empire that could function. Malak destroyed worlds to terrify others into submission, creating wastelands rather than territories. This difference highlighted an important aspect of dark side corruption. The dark side did not affect all individuals identically. It amplified existing traits, fed on personal weaknesses, twisted fundamental aspects of personality in ways specific to each individual. Revan's tactical genius became cold calculation. Malak's protective instinct became destructive rage. Both were corrupted, but the form of that corruption reflected who they had been before the fall. The planet Quayle, Malak's birthplace, remained a devastated world long after his death. The Mandalorian attack that had destroyed it during Malak's childhood had left scars that centuries could not fully heal. Some historians noted the tragic irony that Malak, who had suffered so much from the destruction of his home, went on to inflict similar suffering on countless other worlds. The trauma he experienced as a child, rather than teaching him the value of restraint and the cost of violence, had apparently convinced him that overwhelming force was the only language the galaxy understood. Legacy is a complex thing, particularly for figures as controversial as Darth Malak. He was not remembered with the same mixture of respect and fear that characterized memories of Revan. Malak was simply feared or pitied, depending on who was doing the remembering. The metal jaw that had defined his appearance became a symbol of Sith brutality in popular culture. Holodramas and historical fiction depicting the Jedi Civil War invariably portrayed him as the ultimate villain, the monster who killed billions without remorse. Yet those who studied the historical records in detail, who examined the documents and recordings that survived the war, sometimes came away with a more complicated view. They saw a boy who lost everything to violence, a Jedi who wanted desperately to prevent others from suffering similar loss, a warrior who compromised his principles in pursuit of victory, and ultimately a Sith Lord who died with regret for what he had become. It was possible to condemn his actions while acknowledging the tragic path that led him to commit them.